Hello, my name is Raquel Torrent, psychologist, integral psychotherapist, and transpersonal guide. We are here today because I felt an overwhelming call to action when the Ukrainian devastation started. And yet, the only thing I did was to pray. Now, with the terrors of the humanitarian catastrophe which is taking place in the Palestinian Gaza Strip that many are calling a broadcasted genocide, I feel the human responsibility of doing what I can to unite my voice to the choir who is actually making a call for peace. I want to do it from the level and discipline that I best know. And I cannot envision a better person to make this call than my mentor and friend, Mr. Ken Wilber, one of the best philosophers and thinkers of our time, a real activist of the spirit, founder of the integral theory, and writer of almost 30 books translated to more than 20 languages. Hello, Ken, my dear. Thank you very
Hello.
much.
How are you doing?
Thank you very much for responding to this call for peace and by accepting this interview. Hello.
Of course. Sure.
So, Ken, which would you say that are the real causes of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, which has provoked this unacceptable atrocity that the people from Gaza are experiencing and that represents a real humanitarian crisis? Do you think it's something historic or political, economical, or religious?
Yeah. Well, all of those, because we need to take an integral approach. And so historically, we see this disjuncture going back, well, almost 10,000 years. Because it was about 10,000 years BC that the Israelis started getting this idea that, quote, this land is my land. God gave this land to me. And so the Israeli people have always had a feeling of ownership of that land. Now, when Muslim Arab approach came in, both the Israeli spiritual orientation and the Muslim Arab orientation, both of them tended to be fundamentalists. And that's very, very bad. Most religions have at least two forms. One is fundamentalist and one is mystical. The fundamentalist believes in mythological forms and ideas. So it believes in Zeus and Apollo and Aphrodite and Jupiter and Mars and so on. And all of those, of course, are mythological beings. And the ideas connected to those mythological beings are mythological beliefs, mythological ideas. Yeah. And that's what most of the world's religions come from. So Christianity believes that there is literally a biological son of an almighty God. Are you kidding me? I mean, I got to be kidding me. So there's all of that mythology on the Christian side. And then there are occasional Christian mystics.
Oh, we got caught. Your voice went away.
Caught in what he called the cave of reality. And the real sunlight of reality is in back of us, casting the light through us to make shadows on the back of the cave. and we're all addicted to the shadows in the back of the cave. We don't have any idea that they're just shadows, that the real realities exist beyond the shadows and more with the real sun. So that problem is when you have two mythological forms of religion opposed to each other, that can lend to a great deal of violence and antagonism and aggression, because, among other things, the Arabs believe that that land is actually theirs, and they can carve out a part of that land for themselves. And the Israelis are like, no, God gave us that land, this great mythological being who looked all over the world and decided that he would plunk his one and only son down to a very small tribe in a very dry part of the Mideast, a part that doesn't have any oil, by the way. Talk about bad luck. And that, through various historical forces, became the major religion of the West. And another religion grew up in the West, which was the Islamic, and it had a great deal of initial influence. There was Islamic Empire, and the belief in Allah became almost as widespread as the belief in Jehovah, although they're both of the same believability as Zeus or Apollo or Aphrodite. I mean, they're just mythic imaginary forms. And those, again, are different from the mystics that have a direct experience of what they generally call a ground of all being. And that's a very real metaphysical concept, a ground, an infinite ground of all being, the reality of all manifestation, the reality of the entire universe. And that's a very real metaphysical concept, and it answers very real metaphysical questions. Like, if everything has a cause, and most things do, are caused by something, then what causes the first cause? Well, there has to be something that's not itself the cause, and that's the ground of all being. So that's a very real concept. And what's more, mystics have direct experiences of this ground of all being. And so they feel one with the entire universe. And that's a very real mystical experience. And it's most of the founders of the great religions, including Jesus Christ and Mohammed and Abraham, they have had some type of this direct unity experience.
Yeah.
So I and the Father are one, or Jesus Christ clearly believes that he is one with this ultimate ground of all being.
The Father.
Muhammad and several other founding religious founders. But mostly their followers fell into the fundamentalist mythic forms of that belief, because not everybody has a direct experience of this ultimate reality. And so they just think about it. And when they think about it, they use the earliest forms of thought, which develop in childhood around 4 or 5 or 6 years old. And they're all mythological forms of thinking. So you get this fundamentalist belief structure that grows up. And when you put those fundamentalist belief structures together and they disagree on the form of the mythological God that they feel is most real, So Allah versus Jehovah. Then you've got the grounds for a historically prolonged, violent conflict. And that's the historical difference. The political difference has come down to the politics of ownership. This land is my land. God gave this land to me. And the Muslims are, no, wait a minute. Allah gave this land to us. Oh, yeah? Well, take that. And they go at it. And those are the political reasons. On the economic side, the Muslims, for whatever reason, have done very little to develop a vibrant economy. And whereas Israelis, Jewish people, have very aggressively engaged in economic forms that are very profitable. And so Jews are worldwide fairly wealthy people. And when you get wealth versus poverty, that's another form of conflict. Particularly the poor people feel like the wealthy people are oppressing them. And that's the basic form of political belief in the West is called an oppression paradigm. Because what happens when you have somebody who's very poor, they feel that they are being oppressed or held down, or that somehow somebody else is taking all the money. And that would be the Jews in this case. So you have victims and the oppressed, and then you have the oppressors. And you can be one or the other. You can't be both. And this was actually made into a very elaborate doctrine by Karl Marx, where he saw all of history as a conflict between oppressors and oppressed. And the oppressors generally are oppressing the poor people and the disadvantaged and so on. And so that has become a deep source of conflict for various groups of people, and particularly the Muslims and the Jews.
Ken, what about this reality that during many occasions, the Israelites have been like getting onto the Palestinians, like in conflicts with the Palestinians all the time, historically, like really getting on to them because they want something from them. It's clear. I am not a politician at all, or even a historian at all. And yet, I think that the Palestine had a land and the British divided their land to give it to the Israelites. So this is something which the Palestinians feel like they have been taken off something which was theirs, no?
Right. Well, that simply adds to their sense of being oppressed, taken advantage of, victimized. And there is truth to that.
Truth to that, right.
Yeah, and that's a problem. But the problem is compounded by the fact that members of, like, let's say, Hamas really have psychological problems. Anger, hatred, aggression, jealousy, envy, attack mode. Many Arab Muslims have this personality disorder where they go out, they're very willing to kill men, women, children, and babies. I mean, on October 7th of this month, Hamas attacked Israel and took 36 hostages, including babies, women, men, and children. And so one of the main problems we have is a psychotherapeutic problem that affects Hamas more than it affects the Jews. Jews, of course, have their own psychotherapy problems, and you gotta watch that.
Do you really find acceptable what the Jews are doing now with the, because it's a real humanitarian crisis what they are creating, that because I understand that they want to kind of respond to what Hamas did, and yet the atrocity that the civil people, you know, the civil how do you say that, the citizens, you know, of Palestine now, which are just civils, children and women, are suffering so much without water, without hospitals. More than 60% of hospitals are now smashed completely. I mean,
right. Well, again, it's a difficult problem because, to take the hospitals, for example, one of the reasons they're not functioning is that very soon, for at least 10 years now, in 1014, the New York Times and the Washington Post both reported that Hamas is using hospitals for their main headquarters, so that when Israel attacks them, they're going to kill civilians. And then Hamas can throw its hands back and say, well, they're killing all our women and children. Well, get the fuck out of the hospital is the cure for that. And Israel, it's true that there are women and children suffering, but it's because they're being used as shields for Hamas. Now, that's the opinion of the New York Times and the Washington Post. I'm not making this up. It's not my particular prejudice or viewpoint. But I think there is some truth to that, because Hamas, it can be demonstrated that they locate their headquarters in hospitals, in schools, among civilian populations.
I understand that, Ken. And yet, do you find equal? Because you were talking about psychotherapeutic problems from the Muslims' side. What about the Jews' side? Now taking the water and the food and not permitting the people to go down to the south to escape, all these things. Don't you think that is a psychotherapeutic problem as well?
Well, yes, but what do you do with the standard Jewish procedure of not attacking, deliberately stopping all attacks during particular times of each and every day, so that those people, Muslims who want to leave the area, can do so without being attacked?
They have not done that. They are not doing that very easily, and they have, until they have accepted to do that, which is with what they are negotiating right now. They have, first than that, they have avoided the possibility of entering humanitarian help for the people which was inside of those blockages. So I find that psychotherapeutically crazy as well, because, you know, it's like really trying to make that people dies directly, and they are not from Hamas. They are just Palestinians, you know? So that's what I don't find like sound. I don't find that like they say they want to get rid of Hamas, but yes, terrorism is not acceptable in any form. That's for sure. And yet, don't you think that it's also an ideology that it's they try to get rid of an ideology more than anything?
Well, sure. Um, but let me try to understand you. Are you saying that Hamas is not a terrorist organization?
Oh no, I am saying that they are very terrorist. And
Right.
the ones which are not terrorist are the civilians, women and children, which have been taken off the water, the food, and the possibility to escape for many, many days. And they have been suffering and dying in the streets because they didn't have anything to eat or anything to drink. That is really insane, because it's not normal. I mean, one thing is, I don't want Hamas to be a terrorist anymore. I am not going to permit that this is going to be repeated in my land. Correct. I understand that. And yet, to kill all those people thinking that they are Hamas is not recognizing that they are not Hamas, they are just Palestinians.
Right. Well, but do you not believe that Hamas frequently headquarters among the civilian population in hospitals and schools and places like that? Because we have evidence that Hamas does that on a regular basis. And so if you go ahead and attack Hamas and civilians are killed, what do you do about that?
Yeah, it's not an easy task, that's for sure. It is a real difficult situation, that's for sure. And yet the suffering, I mean, when we see those streets are absolutely devastated, and all the women and children, more than 12,000 children have been killed. It's a lot. I mean, it is really, when you see it from the outside, it's really terrible. Imagine from the inside, families, whole families cut off without a house, without anything, with this um, reasoning of, I want to kill Hamas. Hamas will not be killed because it's an ideology. And
Well,
yeah,
right. As far as I can tell, the blame lies more or less equally with the Palestinians and the Jews,
yeah, yeah,
because Hamas does intentionally
sure,
infect civilian areas.
sure.
And then when Israel tries to fight back, of course, civilians are attacked. But I have seen at least some moves on Israel's part to withhold attacking the Hamas headquarters for certain designated periods and
That's what they
allow civilians to
that's
get
what
out.
they are negotiating. That's what they are
Right.
negotiating now. Let's see if they accept that. The only thing is that it is a real difficult situation because it seems that Israel has like an agenda, a hidden agenda that they want, to really get into the sea and finally get, some kind of an exit to the sea. And anyway, I don't know what the situation is not easy. And the only thing I know is that I see this catastrophe, humanitarian catastrophe, as a real unacceptable situation that we will go to the following questions, and you will tell me what do you think about what
Okay.
the Westerns are doing. Okay,
Okay.
now, from an integral perspective, how would you define what's happening? and which would be an integral solution that politicians could implement?
Well, I think one of the key factors is that politicians have to start thinking integrally, and they have to start speaking integrally. And that means speaking integrally politically, historically, psychologically, economically, sociologically, religiously, and taking all these different perspectives and making sure that they're representing all of them. And that sounds a little complicated, but it's something that if things are going well among communities, they are thinking integrally. That's why there are no major problems arising between them. Because if they're thinking integrally in political terms, and on economic terms, and on religious terms, and on sociological terms, then they're looking from all perspectives, and they're making sure that all perspectives are included in any decision they make. And when both sides are doing that, you're not going to get in trouble. You can't.
For sure. And yet, do you think that politicians are willing to learn those integral perspectives?
Well, that's the thing. How much suffering can they stand? Because most politicians, frankly, can stand a lot of suffering, because they bring on a lot of suffering, because they don't think or talk integrally. They're not taking all perspectives into account. They're taking just their perspective into account. God gave me this land is mine. I'll kill you if you don't get off it. And then the other side says, well, oh yeah, this land is my land, and God gave this land to me, and I'm going to kill you if you don't get off. And then there they go. And they're just at each other's throats around the clock. And once you think you've got the right to attack somebody else, then that means you've got the right to do anything. You can torture them, you can murder them, you can hang them, you can strangle them. It doesn't matter. And that's why, and TV cameras are always there to catch that action. Oh, look at what they're doing to those poor civilian people. Or, oh, look at the horrible things that are being done to children and babies. And all of that goes out on the news. And the small percentage of each side that's trying to include all of these perspectives and to do the right thing by all of them, those don't get any attention. And so what we get is this brutal conflict over the Gaza Strip. And it's just horrifying what's going on.
See, politicians, you remember when Clinton and Obama were kind of integrally aware, and it seemed that something was going to be ending, and something was going to be starting.
Clinton had even read some of my work. He knew about it. Yeah.
But now, all that, it seems that it has diluted, unfortunately. And right. It's like we have gone back again into blue mean, right? Don't you think that we are back into amber, and or even before? Because it's like, oh my God, we are again looking into the right extreme wings, and not thinking socially, just me. And I mean, it's really disgusting.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's what happens when you get two sides of what turns out to be an argument. Because they both have certain fundamental beliefs that disagree with each other. because they're fundamentally mythic beliefs. And when you have mythic beliefs at each other's throat, there's no reality that you can appeal to that will resolve that, because myth is not reality. Myth obscures reality. Myth is hiding reality. So, I mean, if you're actually going to believe that there's a guy walking around who's the one and only biological son of the one and only creator of the entire universe, and there's only one of them, the Son of God, well, I'm sorry, that's not reality. That's not anything near a reality. And so when both sides are full of those types of thoughts, there's nothing you can appeal to that will end that conflict. Because if you are going to believe your myth, and you're going to believe your myth, you're going to believe in your Jehovah, and you're going to believe in your Allah, well, there's nothing that's going to make you give up that belief. And so, wait, no, my Jehovah's right, and your Allah is bad. No, my Allah is good, and your Jehovah is the source of all evil. Well, oh yeah, and then you pick up your guns and your knives and your swords and your torture mechanisms, and you go at each other. And there's nothing that can be done that will stop that.
And yet, don't you think that Jehovah or Allah have something in common, which could be kind of like the common thread, let's say, the common unity for a solution? Could it be, which will be Allah has love and wants love, and Jehovah as well. So I will understand that if they center in love, love for people, love for life, respect for life, because love is also respect. So don't you think that love is the only answer?
Well, if you're a mystic, it is. But if you're not a mystic, it isn't. And the reason it isn't is, if I believe that Jehovah is the one and only God of all things, and you believe, no, not Jehovah, it's Allah, and Jehovah gave me this hunk of land, and I want you off of it, and he said, oh no, Allah gave me this chunk of land, I want you off of it. Well, everybody that believes in Jehovah or Allah is not believing in love. Because if you have your firm belief that Jehovah is the one and only God, and you're facing somebody who believes in Allah, and you're both fighting over a piece of land, and you believe Jehovah gave this land to you, and I believe Allah gave this land to me, then we're not going to love each other. We're going to hate each other. You won't get off my land. I hate you. Oh, no, you won't get off my land. I hate you. And religion is the source of as much hatred as it is love. Now, obviously, some people that believe in religion do have a sense of love, but not everybody. Many people that believe that Jehovah is my one and only God hate people that don't accept their belief. Yeah. And that's the problem. More wars have been caused by religion than by any other factor in human history. Yeah. And it's terrible, but that's the way human beings are. And that's why I put, for this, the deep causes of this conflict, I put fundamentalist religion right at the core of the problem. And I think that's historically undeniable. Yeah. And it's a shame.
It is a shame. It is above all because then where is love? you know.
Right. And if you have a mystical experience, it is of love. And love means a oneness with something. Whether I love ice cream and I want to become one with ice cream, or whether I love my dog and I want to hug my dog, or whether I love you and I want to become one with you. And that's wonderful. So a mystical love, if all religions were mystically loving,
Yes.
there wouldn't be any warfare.
Yeah.
Because nobody would want to hurt anybody else. You want to love them. You want to embrace them. You want to become one with them. And then that's great. But the percentage of religious believers that are actual mystics is relatively small. It's about 5%. And so that's not enough to...
Even in the Catholics, you know, that,
yeah.
well, Christians, mysticism has only been accepted like 25 years ago.
Yeah, that's because true.
Mysticism has been kind of denied.
Yeah.
You couldn't have a direct experience of God. No, that was forbidden. Who are you to have a direct experience of God? Right. No. You have to come through me, which I am the priest.
Yeah, and that's the way religions went. Most world famous religions started with a mystical experience.
Yes.
Very powerfully felt by a single person. And then they taught it to their followers, and not all the followers had that experience. And so they started repeating it in mythic forms. Yeah. And they let their own self-aggrandizement and self-aggression take over. And that's what got spread as religion. And that's just
where love ended.
That's right. And that's one of the truly sad realities of history.
Yeah.
Of human history.
Very, very sad. So due to the excess of information and devastating images that we see about this war, we have death in the soup while we're having lunch. Right. Like televised horror, as we said before. So how do you think this affects human consciousness? Will our ethics and moral loosen in the long run because of such exposure to violence? Or will increase judgment, repulse, and or fear? And what about disinformation and fake news also?
Yeah, what all of these have in common, including our shadow material, is that they're all distortions of reality. So where we should feel love, we don't see love. We see hatred or self-aggrandizement or selfishness or something that's not a real reality. It's not the fundamental reality, which is love. But again, that's not the primary experience that most humans have. Or they love occasionally, or they love a little bit their girlfriend, their boyfriend, or whatever. But it's not a powerful, overwhelming, mystical unity. And so they all end up being, to the extent that they turn into hatred and self-aggrandizement, jealousy, and all of those, they end up being distortions of reality. They're just not fundamental realities. They're distortions. And they spread like crazy. The distortions are...
When we see this in television over and over again, and we are eating while we are seeing a baby cut in two and things like this type of horrors, okay, what do you think in which way do you think that this affects our consciousness and our morals, and where are our ethics are going to go? Where are our morals are going to go?
Well, where they're going to go is down the toilet. Because when you see repeated, like babies cut in two, and it just eats away at your own moral and ethical sense. Because who's doing that, and how are they allowed to do that? And why is it happening? And why am I always seeing it? And it just slowly eats away at your ethical stance. And that's one of the horrors of a history that is fundamentally lacking love and is promoting self-promotion and self-aggrandizement and self-aggression and so on. And unfortunately, that is the story of history. And it's war after war after war. One historian calculated that for every 1 year of peace in humankind's history, there have been 13 years of war. Now, just think about that, and think about the constant influence of this war-like sensations that we're getting. And it's interrupted every now and then by 1 year of peace. Oh, thank you very much. That's wonderful. I can't thank my God enough for that 1 year of peace. It's just terrible.
It is.
And what that means is not everybody's perspective is being honored. Very few perspectives are being honored. Just my perspective and my land, and get off of my land or I'll kill you. And that's what 13 years of human history have been about, for every 1 year of peace. And it's just horrifying, but it's the truth. And it's just something that human beings have to deal with.
And that's why it is so difficult for evolution to keep on going, because, it's a regression all the time. We evolve and then we regress, and then we evolve and then we regress. And it's
Right.
like evolution is trying to really
Right.
push it on, and it's not easy. That's why we are only 5 or 7% of the population, the human population, which are really, trying to take everyone there. And
Right.
it's so difficult, because
Yeah.
when it seems that we are really going a little bit, then again, it's impressive. It's really impressive.
It
Anyway,
is. Yeah.
how do you see the role of the United States and Europe that are playing in this horrendous conflict or crisis or war, whatever we want to call it, Israel-Palestine? And what else do you think that the United States or Europe could be doing in this situation?
Well, I hate to sort of be repetitive, but the one thing that all world leaders need to do is actually lead. And that means they have to be an example to all of their followers. And that means they have to take into account the perspectives of virtually everybody. And that means they take an integral viewpoint.
But that is not happening.
It's easy enough to say, but you can also teach an integral viewpoint. You can teach, well, there's this perspective, and there's this perspective, and there's this perspective. You can start with the 4 quadrants.
You cannot teach to the ones that do not want to hear.
Right. That's right. And that's the problem.
That's the problem. But the question has to do with, they say in general, what I've heard is that the European community and the Westerns in general are not doing enough to, we are holding back. Like the United States, which always has been very helping, the peace and helping, the oppressed and helping. Now it's kind of like this, and Europe is kind of like this, and
Yeah,
nobody is really doing anything to stop this catastrophe, this
that's true.
humanitarian catastrophe.
That's true.
So
When you
how do you
go,
see that?
when you go, people are like this, that means I'm not going to look at it the way you see it. I'm not going to take Europe's perspective. I'm not going to take another state's perspective. I'm just not. And so we refuse to take an integral viewpoint. And that's something we actually do. We actually refuse it because we all have the capacity to take these many perspectives. We can all look at the world through four major quadrants or four major perspectives. And each of those quadrants has a different perspective. So we actually have 8 zones of different perspectives. And we can adopt any one of those zones fairly easily. And if we know that there are people out there that are looking at the world through these different perspectives that are represented in 4 quadrants and 8 zones, then we know what perspectives we should take if we want to see the world the way others are seeing. And when we see the world through a different perspective, then that'll be part of our leadership. Because we say, oh, I have to talk to that perspective. Oh, and I have to talk to that person and their perspective. And I have to talk to that person. And each of them are seeing the world differently. And I know that. And I can take their perspective. And when I do that, I'll talk to them. And I'll provide leadership for them. And they'll trust me because I can see the world the way they're seeing the world. And so if we have real leadership, and that's something that I think people intuitively respect. Like when we see an American running for president and we listen to them talk or debate, we can tell the ones that have a very wide perspective. We can just feel it, that they're looking at the world the way I'm looking at the world, or they're trying to, and they're talking to that. And I can spot that, and I like that. I think that's one of the things that was so impressive about John Kennedy, for example, is he really talked to people, and people adored him. He was just loved. And occasionally, somebody will come on the political scene that has that capacity, and we really respond to them. So it can be done. And what, of course, in my wildest pipe dreams, what I would like to see is a school for politicians where they can actually learn how to take on these different perspectives and learn how to talk.
I proposed that in 1985.
Oh,
I
excellent.
proposed a school for politicians. And yet, because I don't have any money to promote such a thing,
Right.
I never arrived anywhere because
Right.
you need to have money to make marketing and to really let the politicians know that you exist, right?
Right. That's right. And unfortunately, that's not something that happens. And another problem that we're dealing with, we've talked about the psychotherapeutic contributions to this problem on the side of both Hamas and Israel. They both have psychotherapeutic issues.
Yes.
And that means issues with anger, hatred, aggression, jealousy, envy, attack modes, and so on.
Yes.
And you actually have to address those shadow issues.
Yes.
So that people can learn, oh, I see that I have that. I don't want to have that. I will stop having that. And we have to put pretty much all of Hamas and all of Israel through a psychotherapy session or several. And without that, they're not the individual soldier who's killing the baby or stabbing the woman or shooting people. They're not going to stop doing that if they've still got the impulse arising to do that. And that puts an enormous strain on this problem. And it's one of the reasons that the Israeli-Arab problem is so recalcitrant and so unyielding and has been around for so long and shows no chance of resolving. That there's neither side is willing to do what's necessary to give it up. And that is just an impossible psychotherapeutic mess.
And I understand 100% what you say, and I agree. And there is an issue that, let's see, what do you think about, which is the energetic issue. Like, for example, when people look at the TV and they see all this horror, right? And they go into the reflection of their own shadow when they see that, right? They judge, oh, how horrible they are. I hate these ones. I hate the others. And all the reflection of the shadow comes in, oh, I am fearful, or am I going to die, or they're going to kill me, or whatever. Okay, so it's like a reflection of their own shadow that they see. So I always say, let's see, what do you think? I always say, don't do that, because if you do that, you are adding energetically the same thing that you are receiving. Therefore,
so don't do what? Don't do what?
Don't judge. Don't do be fearful. Don't do hate. Don't, all these negative things that people send to Netanyahu or to Hamas or to whatever. I say, don't do that, because you are adding negativity to negativity. That's negativity to the square. So if you don't do that, if you are able to see that and send love, you are changing the energy, you are transmuting at least the energy, giving a chance energetically to that Netanyahu or to that Hamas to receive waves of love. And if they do receive waves of love, maybe sometime they will get a little bit of that, and a neuron will open to light. And then they will say, oh, I'm not going to kill this woman. Or they will say, I'm going to take psychotherapy. Or they will do something different. Yet, if we don't do that, of every time we see this in the TV, if we don't send love, and we keep on sending hatred and judgment and fear and all these negative things, we're contributing to the negativity of the conflict and of the war and of the problem. And we are killing the woman and the baby, and we are responsible then of maintaining the craziness. Would you say that?
And what that really implies is virtually every person who's involved in what you're saying needs some form of psychotherapy. Because it's usually only in a psychotherapeutic situation where a person will look at their negative feelings and, in a sense, judge them as negative, correctly judge them as negative, and then seek to replace that negative with a positive. So if they feel hate, they'll learn to replace it with love. If they feel jealousy, they'll learn to embrace it with appreciation, and so on. And it's in the psychotherapeutic setting that they actually learn to see and make those changes. And that's what psychotherapy is, changing all of your negatives for positives. And that means you have to recognize all your negatives, your jealousy, your envy, your hatred, your, on and on. And you have to recognize them when they come up in regard to your therapist, and you have to talk about them. And then you have to say, okay, I don't want to express that hatred. I want to feel love. And you actually practice replacing hatred with love. And when you complete that process fairly well, that's the end of psychotherapy. You're finished. You've completed the course. You can get out of here now. But that's what's so important about psychotherapy, is it really is almost the only setting where human beings practice replacing negativity with positivity.
Yeah.
And that's no matter what form you're working with, Freudian, Jungian, Gestalt, it doesn't matter. They all aim at doing that. And that's what makes it such an especially important endeavor.
In which way do you think that Western civilization has contributed to the hatred that radical Islam has against Westerners? In which way? And why would you say that many people are also against the Jews? And why also the West criticizes Muslims in general?
Right. Well, what the Western contribution has been to this ownership mentality of somebody saying, God gave this land to me. This is my land. You have no right to be here.
Ownership. No.
Yeah. And that's just bad. That ownership mentality is just, it divides the earth up in the little segments and puts owners on each one. And the owners don't like any of the other owners, and it's just a mess. And for whatever reason, that got a real start in the West, and of course culminated in like a Marxist notion of ownership as capitalism and all of the things that are wrong with that, supposedly. And as for why would you say that many people are also against the Jews? That's just standard anti-Semitism. And that goes back at least 5,000 or 6,000 years in the West. And it got its start with beliefs such as Jews killed Jesus. And they're worth hating, that we don't want anything to do with them. And also Jews were allowed to bank money and to loan money. And many people saw that as evil, and Jews were just the source of all of that evil. So there are a lot of causes to anti-Semitism, but it's a very well recognized human fault. And it just seems to spring up almost wherever Jews are, because some of these ideas about loaning money or killing Christ or something always pop up with them. And each of those ideas lends a hatred or negativity to the atmosphere, and Jews are the cause of that. So we hate them, and that's just the way that goes. And why the West criticizes Muslims in general, that can be traced almost all forms of hatred can be traced to some minor truth. So you can make a case that Jews killed Christ. It was the Jewish leaders that predominantly brought charges against Jesus and turned them into the Romans. So you can make a small truth out of that case. And the small truth from the Muslims comes from the Quran, because large portions of the Quran instill warlordship. They instill a worship of war and fighting and killing. And that's, I mean, Muhammad notoriously went to those sections when he felt problem seized, and he would get on his warlordship horse and go out and kill people. And people reacted to that. They didn't like that warriorship part of Muslim code. And again, it was based on a small amount of truth, but it was a truth they could dependably turn to and find good reason to hate those war-loving Muslims. And I mean, as I say, what we're looking at when we talk about these negatives are just a list of the number of negatives that humans are open to. And then when we look at those, what we find is that history is just dominated by those negatives. They give us 13 years of war to every 1 year of peace. And that's just, that's a very sad commentary on the human condition.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. You know, regarding the Westerners seen by the Muslims, don't you think that they see the West, and also I think Russians as well, not only the Muslims but also Russians, for example, they see the West and they hate the West for reasons maybe like not a consistent and maintained argument and manner and politics, and because it seems that the West all of a sudden wants this and now wants this, and we are not maintaining as Westerners like a sound consistency and a sound reality that can be our Western truth. No, we are divided. We are fragmented. Everyone thinks differently. So there is, I think they see in us little truth, little something that they can say, okay, that's what they think. We like it or not, but that's what they think. No, it's like they get crazy because one day we say one thing and another day we say another thing, and we pardon the depth of this but not of this, and so they don't go where to go. They don't know where to stand with us. No, don't you think that has also something to do with the hatred of the Muslims toward the West and Russians?
Yeah. In large part, it's because the West does have so many different ideas. And it's sometimes amazing that they can call all of them the West. Because the only thing...
should be called like that by democracy. What in the world then is democracy? If democracy doesn't have a real truth to it, and if it doesn't have a real principles of behavior and thoughts and manners, that's what it doesn't hold on. It's true that we are very large population, let's say, and yet if we are democratic, why aren't we more united?
Yeah. And about the only thing that the West has in common is that it's been fairly economically successful. So it's come down to it's a fairly wealthy economic system. And that's more or less true. There are plenty of poor people in the West and plenty of hungry people. but the hunger in the West has been reduced, much of it in the last 30 years, to where it's less than 10% of the population. And that's amazing. And that's largely because we are fairly wealthy and we can afford to pay off poverty. But that's about it. Not everybody believes in the same philosophy. Not everybody believes in the same approach to politics. Certainly not everybody believes in the same approach to religion. So that's a real problem for the West. And there was a century, the 17th and 18th century, where virtually every Western country was at war with every other Western country. And it was just, not only the 100 Years' War and the War of the Roses, but it was just the French versus the German, the English versus the continent, Hungary versus Poland. I mean, everybody was at everybody's throats.
Yeah.
That was not exactly a unified condition. So it's funny that the West has nonetheless emerged as a fairly unified place. And although it still doesn't have a unified philosophy or anything like that. That's just the history of the West. And we still call it the West, and that's makes no sense. But,
it's very unreal, the truth.
Yeah, right.
Without any doubt, Ken, we are in a moment of terrible despair and horror regarding peace and commitment to human rights and people's well-being. So, what's your integrated personal intuition and gut feeling about the future of this escalation of violence and absurdity that doesn't really show any evolution of human consciousness at all?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a close call. And it very well might be that we go through a period of increasing violence and aggression and
more.
Yeah. But in the long run, we do have evolution on our side, because everything that goes from moment to moment transcends and includes the previous moment. And that transcend and include is involving principles of love and inclusion and care and concern. And that's why if we look at the long haul of Western history, we see a dramatic increase in degrees of belongingness and care and loving. The West 2,000 years ago was a very barbaric and belligerent and at war place. Roman Empire everywhere, picking on everybody and killing people left and right. And that's been our history. But each year, it seems to get a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. So when we get to the 20th century, we have 3 major wars: World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. And then if you add Vietnam and so on. But those all were ended fairly peacefully, and the countries came back together and we moved forward. So I sort of see a continuation of that kind of pattern of there being possibilities of more wars and more aggression. But in the long haul, we get over that. And love peaks out, and care peaks out, and evolution evolves. And that's one of the amazing things about evolution, is it's an inherent drive to betterness. And that's an actual force in the universe. The evolutionary drive is a real existing physical force. It's like gravity and electromagnetism and heat
and love.
That's correct. And those are actual physical existing reality forces. And because those forces are an inherent part of the universe, we're going to continue evolving. Things are going to, in some broad sense, get better and better and better. And Lord only knows the impact that our increasingly sophisticated technology is going to play in this. But technology certainly has a capacity to increase the betterment of humankind. And so we've got that working for us as well. But there can always be ups and downs in this. And I don't expect those to go away.
So could we say that all which is happening is part of evolution?
Yeah, I do. Both the good and the bad.
Yeah, yeah. So could you dare to give a date on the betterment of humanity?
Well, I mean, if we look at the overall history of life, I mean, we did start out as single cell, one cell organisms. And look at, I mean, it went to multicellular organisms.
Go so far.
and then that went to fish and amphibians, and then reptiles, and then mammals, and then humans, and then a whole string of human life that got progressively more sophisticated and smarter and better and more loving and more caring, and for certain periods of that, more belligerent and more war loving. And then we'd go through wars and drop them and then come back together and more loving and caring. I would say until we get to a fairly paradisiacal state, that I would give it about 100 years.
Okay. So we will not see it.
No, I don't think so. I think we'll see glimmers of it, because as we're continuing to move towards it, and then we have little regressions, and then we bump down, and then we go move back up. And so as we'll see several move back up phases as we move towards the paradisiacal state. So I think we'll see a couple more of those.
Oh, thank God. At least we have some hope, right? That
Right.
Before we die, hey, you know, I always say that the ones that do have mystical experiences, we are very lucky.
Yes.
We are very lucky, because I cannot imagine how life would be without this deep experience of something else.
Right.
You know? So I really thank, you know, my inner experience. I really thank it. And to you that you have been so wonderful with all your books and your love to give us words for all that. I'm really grateful, because now I can even, like, name it and put names to it, and recognize it, and say, yes, I have that. Yes, I've
Right.
seen that. Yes, I hold that in myself. And yes, I experience these 4 quadrants. And yes, I feel them emerging in me. That's why I say, to the people in my consultation, or to anyone that wants to listen to me, it's like, hey, do this effort of loving everything, whether it's positive or negative energy. Just do this effort, because it's going to bring you back a
Right.
lot. It's going to give you back much better results than if you hate, or if you judge, or if you feel all the time fearful or hatred.
Right.
So anyway, would you like to add something else, Ken, dear, like a call for peace, or whatever
No,
would
I
you?
just like to leave people with the general notion that things are headed in a positive, good direction. We are evolving. And as we look at overall evolution, we see ups and downs. We do. And so if we go through a slight down period, that's okay. It's not going to be forever. It's going to turn around and head back up. And that it's going in that direction. And it's going up and up and up. And I can only imagine what increasing technology is going to do for that, particularly when we get general intelligence, artificial intelligence. That, I mean, we have robots that can talk to us and understand us, and vice versa. I mean, that would be great.
Oh yeah. I think,
Like,
like, we have telephones now, mobile phones. We will have a robot in our home, so
right,
that we can talk with someone that we think, we feel, that understands us. Because
right,
I think that is one of the most deep desires of human beings, is to have someone that may understand what we are saying.
I think that's right. And so that's just going to continue and get greater and greater and greater. We've seen artificial intelligence just explode in the last decade or two. It's really doing an enormous number of things, including many things that we thought were not possible, like translating well between languages.
Oh yeah, that's impressive.
And it's very impressive what's happening on the AI front.
Mhm.
And it's happening very quickly.
It takes off my job, because I was a translator. So it took my job. And yet it's part of evolution, right? It's part of,
Right.
well,
Yeah.
okay, now I dedicate myself to something else.
Right.
I have
Right.
to look for another, like, task for me.
Right.
I will have more time to meditate more.
Right.
Okay, my dear, super thank you. I really appreciate this time with you. As always, it's been a real pleasure to be with you.
It's
my
been
love.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been. Bless
So,
you.
thanks a lot, and above all, to leave us with this sensation of nothing is for nothing, in the
Right.
sense of everything has a reason, and evolution has its own reason.
Right.
So thank you for being with us today.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye, love. Bye.